and my looks.
And your looks.
My wit and my
That's
looks.
his new pacemaker.
It's the size of the quarter. It's no bigger than a quarter.
And they went through, put it in, no surgery, no nothing.
I've heard of it. I want two more pounds. My
It's
friend.
not
It's-
crazy.
it's soft.
My brother got it.
Didn't get it out until they're gone.
Yeah, but I was like, oh, for sure they'll come in and see me.
Should I walk in?
You should be laughing when I do it. That's my dish. That's what I do with kids.
It reminds me of that one line of, oh gosh, what's the other one?
That's it.
Remember?
Jack
Jack
Benny?
Benny.
There you go.
Well,
Oh,
let's get it rolling, Jared.
Yeah. When you were in life.
Okay.
I think it really knows because
I think it's about time. Do we have one more coming?
I hear him talking out there.
Oh, that's Sister Nayland. She'll come when she's ready.
The other half's here.
Is this your visual light in your arm here?
Yeah, this is my visual aid. This is where we all start. And no,
Don't point at any of us, because that's where you end.
right, no. So thank you for coming. And guess I hadn't really thought about saying a prayer, but we probably should open with a prayer. Bishop, would you mind praying for us?
Father in heaven, we're grateful that we could gather here this day for this class. We're grateful for those that have put the time in to prepare this lesson, and we're grateful that we could meet in fellowship. And we ask that thou bless us to be prepared to receive the words that will be presented, and that we can make use of those, and that we can share it with those that need it also. And we pray for these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. I'm thinking that we're going to have to do this so that we can hear better. Can you hear me, Brother Nayland, with this? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. So, as I've been in the Elders Quorum and throughout my life, so when I was younger, we took care of both sets of my grandparents. One was right next door, the other one was in town. We lived in a small town. And so we ended up taking care of them. And also know people from college who died unexpectedly. They were in a plane accident, if you remember that, honey. And there were quite a few people that left wives and children without a husband and father. And, different, what if that would have been both spouses, husband and wife, and then what do you do with the children, right? So things like this happen all the time. And I know from talking to Kelsey, at least from the medical side, there are some very simple documents that Kelsey has that she can hand out to you that will help us to be able to help your children. And I think that, or whoever's making the decisions for you. And I think that that's kind of one of the better things you can do for your family, right? Because they may not know what your wishes were, and et cetera, et cetera. And then, so we'll have Kelsey start with us, and after that, we'll have Brother Rasmussen start, and he'll kind of back clean up, and he's got some legal side, but to be fair and honest, if you're serious, or if you have, let's say like an estate or something like that, you would be better off to not do this by yourself, but at least now you kind of know what information you need, and you'll know who to reach out to after this, right? So Kelsey has stuff, Brother Rasmussen has some stuff, but the whole idea is to be able to inform us, have some handouts so that you can get yourselves better prepared. So at the end, do we want to ask for questions after each presenter or wait till the very end?
I think after each person.
After each person? Okay. So after Kelsey finishes, she'll just say, well, that's what I got. So if you got questions.
For the sake of the video,
Uh,
because this is going to be dispatched, can we share this with other people? Like we did the Constitution?
Yes.
So could you announce who you are when you come up to speak
Okay.
and you're, you know, like, yes, I'm a doctor of winding waters, blah, 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 or I'm an attorney or whatever.
Yeah,
Are you live streaming?
We are live.
we are live, oh boy. Let me tell a quick joke, then I can say, I've been on the internet and I'm famous. No, I'm just kidding. There's my joke, see? So anyway, we'll go ahead and start with Kelsey and go from there.
Okay, so I'm Kelsey Allen. I'm a doc at Loud Memorial Medical Clinics. Just disclaimer, this is not to be taken as like 100% possible medical advice. So, but I'm here to help. So I think just really just getting down to the basics of it. There's a few different forms you can fill out to kind of put your wishes out there for what you want medically to be done with you. And I'll be honest with you, doctors really don't want to get in the middle of your family drama. So the more that you can spell out what you want, the better. It makes us just be able to focus on the medical part rather than dealing with drama, pretty much is a lot of it. Because it's hard for families, and we're there to support families and give them information, but then we leave it up to you guys to choose. So the first thing is like really cut and dry. It's called a POLST. Portable orders for life-sustaining treatment. And really, the only people that really need to fill these out are people that are really frail. So, you know, if you think of like, say, Sister Young 4 years ago, you know, that she's 90-something years old, and, you know, she probably doesn't have much longer to be with us. You know, people that you can look at and you kind of go, yeah, most likely they're not going to be with us. Or if you have a major medical problem, like if you have kidney failure, if you have cancer, if you have congestive heart failure, if you have some type of serious disease. Now, some people will be very adamant about filling it out, like, you know, I might fill one out now because I don't ever want to be resuscitated. But it goes through, pretty much it's really cut and dry. You know, it says, if you find me unresponsive, meaning you're pretty much dead, you're not responding, you don't have a pulse, and you're not breathing. So you're not getting oxygen anywhere. Do you want us to push on your chest and do CPR? Do you want us to shock you? And that might change throughout your lifetime. And that's why this one is not a great one to fill out. Like, you know, I think of the hippos. They're fairly young and healthy, and they probably don't really, they could fill this out, but they absolutely probably don't need it. But if you think of someone like, you know, is very old and their heart isn't working and they've been in the hospital, you know, 3 or 4 times this year, that's someone that for sure should have one filled out. So just running through this. So do you want CPR or do you not want CPR? And a lot of people will say, well, do it one time and if I don't come back. That's great. That's where our other piece of form will come in. But this one's very cut and dry. Do you want it or do you not want it? And so yeah, and like I said, it really depends on, like for me, I will probably say, unless, you know, I guess the circumstances might differ, but for the most part, if you find me on the roadside and I'm not breathing, I don't have a pulse, I don't want anybody to pound on my chest. But everyone's different, and you have to respect people's choices. So then the next one is medical interventions. So, you know, there's a whole gamut. So you could do just comfort measures, you could do limited treatment or full treatment. And I'll tell you, like, so again, I'm going to use the hippos again, or like myself. If I go into the hospital and I'm having a heart attack, yes, I want everything done. Or I say I have really bad COVID, you know, please, yeah, Gary's saying he doesn't want anything done.
Oh, shit.
I heard that. No. So please, you know, intubate me, like put a tube down my throat, ship me to Lewiston, you know, put a stent in my heart, do everything you can to save me. that's kind of where I'm at. Everyone has where they want to be. And so, let's take, sorry, I keep on picking on the hippos because they're kind of younger couples here, so, just looking at them, they're fairly healthy. I don't know of any major medical problems that they have, but they might have something that I don't know about. But, say Brother Hippo gets diagnosed with lung cancer and it's terminal. He might change his mind and change this pulse in a few months, because now his life expectancy is a lot less. And so he might be like, yeah, I really don't want to go through having open heart surgery when I know that my life expectancy is like 3 months. So that's where this really comes into play. People that are really sick, a lot of times will either pick limited treatment or comfort measures. Just because they know that they probably don't have a lot to live, and they don't want to go through that really long, painful process of rehab and, trying to recover from a major medical problem. So that's the pulse. The rest of it, is who filled this out. You do have to fill the pulse out with your medical provider or a medical provider. And this actually goes into the state. You send a copy into the state. You can do it with your doctor, and I have an electronic copy for me, and it just goes into the state. And then it goes and you get a copy of it, and please put it on your refrigerator, put it somewhere where it's super visible. We can always, as medical professionals, call the state and find out what your wishes are. But if your wife or someone doesn't know, say you live alone, and someone finds you down, and the paramedics show up, and you don't want to be resuscitated, and they start pounding on your chest, then we're going against your wishes. But if this is visible, on the refrigerator, that's kind of one place that they look for it. Then they won't do that. And a lot of times, if no one's around, a lot of times they're calling the hospital saying, call the state or see if this is on file and see if this is their wish, kind of thing. So that's kind of the cut and dry. Again, mainly for people that have really chronic diseases that, we don't think that their life expectancy is for much longer, 1 year to 5 years. But you can fill it out at any point, really. It's just you have to remember that if something changes in your life, you do want to update it. Luke, will you come pass around these other ones? Yeah. I don't know if I have enough for everybody, but definitely enough for each couple.
You'll see.
Yeah. Oh, look at Barbara. She's got hers. That's her little slip that says.
In here.
Yeah. So yeah, and a lot of times, and I'm not the best at it, but if I have time around your annual, that's when your doctor should kind of be like, if they have time, hey, do you have these pieces of paper on file? Can we update yours, So the next one is called your Advanced Directive. Advanced Directive is more of kind of your wishes and your wants, and they're very much more detailed oriented. And what I like about this booklet is it actually walks you through it. You sit down. This is where you kind of sit down with who you would want. What the big thing is it names someone that if you are unconscious or you're not able to make your own decisions at that time, meaning you're too sick to make those decisions, then you name someone to do that. Most of the time, as physicians, if you don't have anything, we're turning to your spouse. If you don't have a spouse, then we're turning to your kids. If you don't have kids, then we're looking for friends, or we make the decisions ourselves. But we would always like to kind of hear, from the patient what they want. But like I said, and that's sometimes not doable. Like I'll take Luke's dad. Over Christmas Eve, he got a fever and became delirious and was jibber jabbering about stuff that didn't make sense. He could not make a decision at that point. And so you might not think, oh, that won't happen to me. It's super easy to, anytime you come to the hospital, really it's a stressful moment, and people will become what we call delirious. And they start, it's just stressful on their bodies and their minds. Your minds are a little bit aged, and so you don't take that stress very well. And so it's hard for you to make decisions. And a lot of times you'll come out of that once you get out of that stressful situation, but it happens more frequently than you would think. So this is a great booklet to sit down and go through with whoever you want to make those decisions. So if it's your spouse, if it's your sister, your brother, your oldest kid, or one of your kids, it's good to go through it with whoever would be helping making those decisions. Just look at my notes really quick. So in this packet, the very back of it is where you really is where you actually fill out the paperwork. All the rest of it is just helping you understand those like scenarios. And so some things to think about, does your family know your wishes? Do they know that if, you became, say you have Alzheimer's and you can't make, you don't know who they are, you don't know, what day it is, you don't recognize your husband, you don't recognize them, what would you want them to do? Let me give you a really hard scenario. So let's say that Jared became completely demented, meaning he doesn't recognize Michelle, he doesn't recognize anyone now. And it could happen. There was a 50-year-old just the other day, one of my patients, my patient came and said, my mom has Alzheimer's. And I was like, no, your mom is way too young. Like you're young and your mom can't be that old. And she says, no, she had this kind of rare form of dementia, but it happens. And so now her mom's in the nursing home. Anyways, so if Jared had talked to Michelle about what his wishes were, and he doesn't recognize anyone, say he can't change himself, say now he also has like these big nasty wounds on his legs that we can't get healed because his body's just not working very good and we can't keep good care of him. So he just is like not having much quality of life, and he goes, if my quality of life gets to this point, I really don't care to stay on this world anymore. So then let's say Jared gets pneumonia and Michelle brings him into the hospital and is like, what should we do? If Jared has said like, please let me go, this is like a question in here. If I am like if I have a disease in my brain that doesn't let me make decisions, now I can't get up and move and I can't take care of myself, my quality of life is this way, please don't treat my pneumonia. Then we are honoring Jared's wishes and we don't treat his pneumonia and he passes away. A very treatable disease, but because Jared let his, fill this out, Michelle knows that that's what he wants. So, and that's kind of extreme. Most family members are like, whoa, I would, let's treat the pneumonia, or let's treat the urinary tract infection. But, some people don't want to continue to live, and because their quality of life is lower. Yeah.
So does that revert back then to the comfort measures only?
It's the comfort.
Repeat what-
Oh yeah. So the question was, does that revert back to the comfort measures? And yeah, that's goes back to the medical interventions, comfort measures. But if you look at the back here, advanced directive, it goes, if I've, I can't remember where it's at. There's a place where it talks about if my brain is not working and I'm not able to get up and recognize people, I do not want to treat X, Y, and Z. Then that's in there, and we know. So yeah, Gary.
Yeah, I have a question. When do you look at the hospital records to see what should happen to him? Say I come in. Now this has happened to me 3 times. I come into the hospital and I'm a weirdo or something, because I don't want any IV. And
Mhm.
so, the first time when I had my stroke, the guy started to give me an IV, and I says, check with the hospital. I says, I'm not supposed to have any IVs, and he did it anyway. So there's been 3 times now where,
So you have to find out and make sure you have that documented somewhere.
it is. I got the pink copy filled out, and I filled out twice for the hospital.
You filled out this,
Yeah.
That
it's,
you want
on the refrigerator.
comfort measures only.
Yeah. So I was wondering, what happens when, even at the time I told him, I says, you can't do this, because it's on my,
Mhm.
and he did it anyway. So what happens?
Can you repeat some?
Yeah, so Gary's saying that the question is, what if you go into the hospital and you have it documented that you want comfort measures only, you don't want anything else? And they do it anyways, that's going against your will and,
Is an IV a comfort measure? Say
it
like they brought,
depends.
say like they brought him in
Depends.
because he was really dehydrated.
And
See-
yeah, it depends.
See, I it even specifies on the one of them that I filled out that I don't want it for feeding or anything.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
was just kind of curious, because 3 times now within the last year, they did it anyway.
I think what Gary's wondering is at what point in the process is a doctor required to look for those records?
Yeah, so that's-
But wait, in an emergency
In
scenario?
an emergency scenario, we would be working through it pretty quickly.
But you'd
you
be
know.
slow to get to those.
So,
Take
It-
your
it-
paper with you, Gary.
I
yeah,
have a
yeah.
tape to my forehead.
Well, you laugh about that, but like a lot of medical people will say, I want, DNR means I don't want any CPR tattooed on my chest. So if anyone pulls open my shirt and wants to start pounding on my chest, those letters will be right there on the chest and they will not pound on my chest. So,
Get a tattoo.
there you go, there's a reason to get a tattoo. No, I'm not promoting that. Yeah, with the,
So when I worked at the hospital and I was on the risk management committee, they talked about people having to have their advanced directive with them. So they would have it like on the fridge of their house.
yeah.
So they could grab it if there was an emergency. Barbara could grab it and
Mhm.
take it with her,
It's always in my purse.
or that.
Yep.
If you have things that you don't want people.
To do. Yeah, yeah. And it is kind of the post is an easy thing to find. In some situations, we're not thinking about like, does this person want an IV? Because that's a very standard thing. You come to the ER, you're gonna get an IV
I know.
most of the time.
I know that.
And so, so that's not, if you're not unconscious, a lot of times we're not looking to the pulse because you're awake and alert and breathing to me. And
But
so,
when I tell them,
That's what I'm saying.
but we
They
don't
do it
know
anyway.
it, so sometimes we
They
don't
don't
know if you
He's
are,
delirious.
if you're delirious or not. So we have to go,
I
are
say,
you making good decisions? It doesn't seem like you're making good decisions.
that's
We're going
right.
to defer to
The pulse.
the post, your wife,
Yeah.
your whoever, your advance directive. So you can get this advance directive, fill it out, take it to the hospital, they'll scan it in.
So I think the takeaway here, Gary, is when you go to the hospial, just act crazy. It shouldn't be too hard for you.
No, it's easy.
Then go to your pulse.
No, just be unconscious. That's what it is.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Yeah, just act dead, play dead.
What if you lost your pulse number?
What if you lost it? You can call the state phone number and they can get it to you.
Is it in here?
It should be on this piece of paper. Yep, it's on the bottom. That number's there. And a lot of times, if you filled it out electronically, it's automatically in our system. So,
So how would they know you got it even a pulse?
so a lot of times we're checking the pulse if you come into the ER unconscious or not without a pulse or without a a living pulse. So you are essentially dead to us, and we're like, oh crap, what does this person want done? We'll look at the pulse, we'll look at the loved one that's sitting there. It's kind of the easy one to go. It's like, do you know what they want? Do you have a pulse? And they're like, oh yeah, they have a pulse. Do you know what they want? And then we look up the pulse anyways to make sure it matches. So sometimes though I say this, but the loved one will sometimes out.
So do they, if you don't have your number handy, do they
We
just
can
look
call.
it up with your
We can
name,
call.
name and birth date? Or
What we do is we call. We call the state, we pick up the phone and we say, hey, we have so-and-so here, and they can look it up. I don't know all the specifics, I just turn to the nurse and do that, so I can't tell you exactly, but pretty much I turn to someone and say, call the state, find out what their pulse says, and they get on the phone. But in the meantime, if we don't know, if we don't have direction, you're gonna be getting CPR.
Do they have wristbands for that? I'm like.
I'm sure they do.
They have bracelets, so you can.
Yeah, yep.
That
Yep.
Out of state.
Out-of-state people, yeah,
Traveling in Hawaii.
yeah, so that's a good question, I don't know all the answers on that one. Cause I'll have people that are flown out to other states and they'll fill out a post there. So say if you get really sick here, and I fly you to St. Luke's in Boise, they'll probably fill out another post, but it's from the different state. But yeah, I don't know, a lot of times then I'm just trying to get a hold of a loved one to find out, we're doing CPR, we're doing stuff, and I'm finding out from a loved one, like, do they want this? But our default is, we try to save that person. So,
So in that way, would you recommend filling out a pulse for most states you're in?
no, just carry one like Barbara has one on her.
Okay.
So if you're that worried, and again, like, I think you guys missed the beginning, like the pulse is, if you are very dead set on not having, being resuscitated, not having CPR, then I guess I would fill one out. But if you're not, then the pulse is more important for people that are really frail. People that we don't think their life expectancy is going to be longer than 5 years. And so we kind of can go, what would you like? Say, randomly that you found down. Say we walked out to the parking lot and we found someone laying in the parking lot. What would you want us to do? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? So go ahead, Pat.
How come there isn't a check mark for a priesthood blessing?
No, there's not. There's not. And so if you show up in the ER, you can ask to have your chaplain notified. And we just had some incidences with that, and we definitely have now the LDS church listed. Usually, there was Ramsey, there was another nurse, Becky, that was LDS that knew kind of how to get a hold of us pretty quickly. I think that's all that's LDS. And so now I think Luke's name is on there, and maybe Jared's, I'm not quite sure. Do you know who I just had a nurse come say, Luke's on the chaplain list, and I was like, I guess he is, that's great.
I think I had Ramsey put and Helene.
Okay,
So that way,
yeah, so that
they
way
just wanted to
people
visit
can get
from the Relief
contacted.
Society, they could get hold of Helene easy.
It's interesting, because I was on that when I was bishop.
Yeah, and it goes
Over the
through,
years.
and it goes through multiple things, and I've never seen the list. But most of the time, I'm pretty aware, of
It
people that
gets
are
out.
there. It gets, people that come in that are LDS will usually know the priesthood, who to contact. So,
Even their families who aren't members or less active.
yeah.
Call the bishop.
They know, yep. So let me just read through one of these scenarios and just to let you guys think. So Sam, who's 44, has just been told he has a serious illness that will cause his health to deteriorate slowly. He has also been told his condition is terminal. There's no cure for his illness and he will eventually die. However, there are treatments that may help Sam live longer. In thinking about his illness, Sam is anxious about his future, concerned about the cost of his treatment. and what his quality of life will be like. Because he has strong faith, Sam is not afraid to die. However, he has never talked about his death or thought about what kind of health care he would want. He is concerned about how his illness will affect his loved ones. So this brings up questions of like, quality of life. This is a terminal condition. So for Sam, I would recommend that he fills out a post and then also this advanced directive. So anyways, it's just a thought. I've had multiple incidences where, you have some family members that want to keep mom and dad alive, others that they're all in agreement, but it definitely is hard when people aren't in agreement. Go ahead, Luke.
Could you talk about how the conversation that we've had about how family members can feel guilt, and then that leads them to a different decision-making process?
Yeah, so let me take an example. So I had a patient that has had Alzheimer's for a really long time, been in a nursing home. No one came and visited him. Family never came and visited him. I think he got pneumonia or something. He got put in the hospital, and he wasn't eating. He was deteriorating. But he was getting a little bit better. Like whenever you get sick and you're that sick already, and you get sick on top of it, you're never going to get back to that baseline where you were at. You're always going to kind of slowly kind of chunk away down. And so he definitely was going to have a change in quality. And so we met with the family, and the family's like, no, do everything. I'm like, well, he can't eat and drink now. Like, he just can't. He's not able to safely eat and drink, and he just physically can't. And so we're going to have to put a feeding tube in if you want him to survive. Yep, we want it. And so you'll see that a lot with some families, and it doesn't even have to be that extreme of an example, but kids will feel guilty that they have not been seeing their parents
Enough.
And is that enough? A certain, there's a varying degree of that. And so they will keep their parents alive. And so that's, again, if you don't want to be alive and you don't want to have that type of quality of life, write it down. Give that authority to someone that you think will follow your wishes. Because that's what you're doing, is going through this packet to talk to someone and be like, this is what I want. I know one of Luke's sisters will have a really hard time following what her parents want, because she wants to keep her mom and dad alive at no cost. And it's like, you gotta decide. And so what I really enjoy being here, rather than the city, is people are very reasonable about their decisions. They understand, and people don't want to be kept alive just to be alive. And so I really enjoy that. It's a good perspective, I think, of like where it said like Sam has faith and he knows what's on the other side. And so you have to balance that quality versus quantity. And so think about it. And Luke also has a different perspective about it. And so he gained a lot of compassion and a lot of different characteristics that he got from taking care of his grandparents for 9 or 10 years. And that was a blessing for his family to take care of them. Where for me, I'm like, I don't really want to go through that. It's like, if I get pneumonia and I'm not sick, let me go. Don't treat me. And so, and again, that's looking at God's plan and looking at, how trials can bless you. And so you definitely should include the Lord in your decisions with this, but I think the biggest thing is letting your family know what they want. Just a few other things that aren't super medically related. We just barely went through this in the hospitals. A lady came and presented to like our whole hospital. She wrote like just this quick little book. What is it called? Something Mortals. Anyways, it pretty much just kind of summarized, how do I get ready for death? How do I make this process easier for whoever has to take care of me after I die? And she put in there, a few takeaways I got was, write down your passwords. Tell your kids what your passwords are somewhere. Take care of, I think Brother Rasmussen's gonna talk to us about your estate. Take care of your estate. But the biggest thing is write down your passwords, especially if you have a cell phone. Like, so your kids can get in your cell phone. A lot of times once you get your cell phone, then we can get into other things. But, like that was a big thing. She's like, oh my gosh, getting into my dad's cell phone. And then once I could do that, then I could close his Facebook account. I could close, take care of all these different things. And so, checklist for mortals. That's what it was. Anyways, it looks like a little kid's book, but it just kind of went through 7 steps of things that way to make it easier. And I'm like, oh, this is a perfect present for mom and dad. Not that they're going to die anytime soon, but I don't want to deal with it. And my dad has a million gazillion passwords, so it's like, please, Dad, write down everything.
Well, and being at the bank now, I understand that is a challenge too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we recommend leaving the deceased person's bank account there don't close it, leave it open for at least a year, because there's still stuff coming in. Or going out or whatever, Social Security or whatever, and other things, and put like one of your kids, as you're getting older, put one of your kids on as a signer on your account, because if you're the only one on your account, they can't get into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what she was saying too.
We had a customer die who had a lockbox, and he used to call his daughter every day, and that's how she knew something was wrong, because he didn't call her. And he had a lockbox full of all this really glorious stuff that he'd saved over the years. And she was not allowed to have it because she was not on his account, and he didn't sign this stuff to her.
Yeah, I don't know all the legalities of that. Like, why don't you sign that? Like, can they get into it before you die? Like, but that's one thing that she said too, is that if you don't get on the bank account, sometimes you can't get into them, and maybe.
That's right.
Brother Rasmussen can talk to that a little bit more. I don't know the details, but that is like something that came up, and I was like, ugh. But I've also heard horror stories about, kids
getting in before they should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I don't know. I don't know all the legalities, so I don't know how that all works. But talk to somebody, talk to a lawyer, and figure all that stuff out, because it will save your kids headaches down the road.
So you did say that when you're filling this out, at least the center part for sure, you need to be with your medical or a medical person.
Yeah, so you can fill it out, but then you have to take it to your doctor or somebody and be like, this is what I filled out, and talk to them, and then they end up having to sign it.
So you don't need a notary or public or
You don't need notary, because then I think what happens is some patient with form, whatever. We usually send this into the state.
Okay, right where you're at.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the advanced directive, I recommend anyone over 18 to fill one out. Because then if, you've named someone to make those decisions, and if you're unconscious, and the easy questions are, I never want to be on life support. That's a lot of people will say. They'll have a definitive, like, I don't want this, I don't want this. It's the what ifs. A lot of what ifs is, what if you have brain cancer? What if you have a family of like 4 little kids, and you get in a big car accident? Oh, it might change my life. Change my mind. So there's a lot of what ifs in here, and so you can kind of, at least, you won't be able to address all the what ifs, but it'll give the person a really good idea of like, this is what mom wants. And when all the other 3 siblings come and say, but I want to keep mom alive, you can go, but right here mom says, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this. So then it makes a lot less drama, a lot less guilt for people to know that they are doing what mom and dad wants. Because that is a big thing. It's like, people will be like, I just feel like I'm killing my parent. And you're not killing your parent. That's what they want. So you gotta let them go. But, so if you have it written down, it's so much easier on people's consciences. So, okay, any other questions? Medically? If you think of something, let me know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
get any more of the advance directive, or something I didn't get those. And this one has your note. Oh, we just.
I'm Dale Rasmussen, and we have all, you'll notice that professionals always have a disclaimer. And so the doctor in the house disclaimed that this was medical advice. Likewise, I am a lawyer. I am not your lawyer. So I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm giving you general observations about things you need to think about in transitioning from one part of eternal progression to another. Thank you, Chelsea, for going through that. That was very helpful. And I'd like to underscore the importance of having these types of advanced directives. Sometimes they're called living wills, and other things in place. Our family had a very trying experience in this in the somewhat recent past. This family member's mother was in the law enforcement, was in the prison system. She was not incarcerated. She was actually on the good side of the bars. And there was a prison break, and 4 guards were attacked, one of whom was this family member's mother. Literally smashed her head in with a hammer, and she was on life support for the better part of a week. She did not leave an advance directive. And so my family member and siblings had to make that decision, surrounded by a bunch of people who did not have similar beliefs, but who were related to this person, and who, after the kids met and they said, Mom would not want to be on life support. She's never coming back, or she's brain dead. And so they gave the direction to the doctors, and they pulled the plug. The other family members said, you murdered your mother. You murdered our sister. I knew her better than you did. And so that's not what she would want. Don't put that on your kids. It's just a really bad idea. And we don't know how long we're going to be here on Earth. I may have noticed in the past, I wear these goofy gloves a lot. I am a trauma magnet. I attract disasters. I've been hit 3 times by cars. The most recent one, I was riding my motorcycle home after work one Friday evening, minded my own business, slowing for traffic that was stopping so I could take an exit. I was going almost stopped, and a guy behind me decided he got distracted. He was doing 60 when he hit me. I laid the bike over, I went underneath the car in front of me and was wedged underneath the car, my motorcycle on the pavement. So I should be dead. And everybody, all the cops, all the medical people who were there said, we can't be talking to you, you're dead. But I went in, I broke my neck, it tore my right rotator cuff. I'll tell you, rotator cuff surgery hurts way worse than spine surgery. It is bad stuff. But I was in the hospital 2 nights, and then had some recovery to do. And I've been left with some nerve damage in my hands, a relatively small price to pay. But I was 60 when that happened. The first time I was hit, I was probably 31 on a bicycle. The second time I was hit on a bicycle, I was about 34. So pretty young. I'm generally pretty healthy. We just don't know. I could have been, my family member's mother was younger than I am, and she went to work one day and didn't come home. So this is stuff that we tend to put off because we don't want to address our mortality. It's kind of a natural thing. The fact that you're here in this room means that you're thinking about this, and that's the right thing to do. Hopefully you also thought about it when you were 20, and a lot of things change when you have kids. If you've got kids, you definitely need to think about this, and all of it is for them, because I guarantee you, when you die, it's not going to affect you in the least what happens to you. Because everything else is on the people you leave behind. And you need to help them. That's what the advanced directives are for. Well, those can help you because that gives you your wish to deal with however long you're going to be treated. I'm with you, Chelsea. I don't want any dramatic interventions. I joked about putting DNR across my chest one time, but you know, I spend half my time in the Portland area, and a tattoo on your chest. People are going to think twice because I don't have a tattoo on my chest, and if they saw DNR, they'd probably think it was a girlfriend's initials or something. So, do the right thing. Do that. And if you go in for surgery, I think last count I've had 8 or 9. I lose count. They'll give you one of the advanced directives or ask you if you want to fill one out. So, don't put it off till then. Yes.
I don't know whether my mother did have that or not, but she was had terminal cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And so she lived in King City, and we went to get her and have her live with us for her time. And one time she fell out of bed, and she said she was hurting so bad and everything. We took her in the emergency, and I don't know whether she had a directive. I just wasn't knowledgeable about it. And the doctor took me aside in the emergency room there, and he says, "What do you want me to do for her?" He says, "She's terminal." And I says, "Well, ask her if she's awake." So he went over and asked her, and she said, "Well, don't let me die."
Yeah, I'm related to a number of those people. On the other hand, my father-in-law was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And not that long after the diagnosis, he had a massive heart attack. And they resuscitated him and took him and gave him a quadruple bypass. And I looked at my wife after that and I said, "Carrie, I love your dad, but if that ever happens to me, that's a sign from God that you're not supposed to turn me back on." And she said, "Wholeheartedly agree."
Noted.
Yeah, so take care of that. There's other stuff that you need to take care of though. And that is, you probably want to, you've spent your whole lives, if you're anything like me, you've spent your whole lives collecting a whole lot of crap and thinking this is good stuff. And you don't want to just, how many of you want to give all your stuff to the state of Oregon when you die? No hands? Really? Speaking of which, if you get the state of Oregon to pick up the phone and give you any kind of an answer in any kind of a mortal lifetime, I'd be shocked. And in the Portland area, 911 doesn't even answer for 20 minutes. So anyway, that's what's going to happen to your stuff, potentially, if you don't take some steps to deal with it. It's not the most likely thing to happen if you have living relatives. But if you don't have living relatives and you would rather have the church or a college or Helping Hands International or something like that make better use of your stuff than the state of Oregon will, you need to do something about it. What happens if you die and you haven't taken care of the estate planning type of situations that you have that you are recommended? Well, then you get to go through, your family gets to go through the process of probate. You guys heard of probate?
Yeah.
Probate, it's a Latin word, it means to prove. And it is a court system within the judicial system of Oregon. And in there, they come in and they say, okay, we've got this pile of stuff that Dale died with, and he didn't tell anybody what he was going to do with his stuff when he died. So let's look at the statutes and we'll open them up. And in the Oregon Revised Statutes, there's a whole string of things that says how your stuff is going to be divvied up if you haven't told anybody what to do with it. Generally speaking, if you have a surviving spouse, then the spouse gets your stuff. But if you were married before and had kids with your first spouse, and then you've got another spouse now, your current spouse gets half, and the kids from the prior marriage get half to split. That may be the way you want it to be. That may not be the way you want it to be. You might want to have everything to take care of your spouse who's living. Then, if you've got kids from both marriages, it gets really complicated. If you don't have a spouse, you don't have kids, it goes up to your parents if they're alive, and if they're not, then to your siblings, and then it goes up to your grandparents. And if they run out of people, then the state will just take it and say, thank you very much, and spend it on something that you otherwise wouldn't want to fund. So.
I've had several wives because women don't last very long with me. But anyway.
We don't want any confessions against your interests, I'll tell you this right now, but yeah.
But I have a will, but when I made it out, it was for my second wife. And so I was told that it's no longer valid, even though the will is there. Is that true?
The question is, what happens if you make a will in favor of a then living spouse and then?
No, she's not in the will.
Oh, she's not? You made it when she was your spouse?
Yes.
Did you name her in the will?
She's named in the will.
If she's named in the will, and then she's passed.
Okay.
This is where I can't give you specific legal advice about that. There are mechanisms for that. Generally speaking, it would tend to go to her estate or her survivors if there are any.
And she's dead, so.
Yeah, and if she had kids, then it could go to their kids.
I see, okay.
But this is an important thing. How do you avoid probate? You make a will. You did a will. That's a good thing.
But they still probate.
They
can probate the will.
They can probate the will, but there are other ways that you can avoid probate, and that are often recommended. But at a minimum, have a will. The will go through probate, but it goes pretty fast because the court says, "Yep," he said, "these 4 things done," and after the bills are paid, it's all good according to the will. You need a will even if you do the other stuff like set up trusts, because you're always going to have something that didn't make it into a trust, and there has to be something to sweep up those leftovers, and they'll be distributed according to your wishes. Having made a will, that's great, but lives change and documents change, and whenever something important in your life happens, you need to look back at the documents that you prepared and say, is this still what I want to happen? I recommend looking at them about once a year. That said, I'm the carpenter whose house is all falling apart because I'm busy doing other stuff. My wife and I did a will when I was in law school, because you're in law school, you think about these things. We had 1 child. We wrote it all down, and it was broad enough that it would have picked up our other kids as well, but we didn't do anything with that for 25 years or something. Our kids were grown. Don't look at it once a year and say, have things changed? Have I got a different wife now that I need to think about? Or did I lose a child? Have I gained a child? Have I gotten to a different stage in life? So look at it about once a year. Just pull it out, look at it, and say, yeah, I don't see anything that I would want to change here. Or you can say, oh wow, since I wrote this, I got a yacht. I want to be sure that I give my yacht to my cousin or whatever. So look at it once in a while and update it. So blow the dust off of it, find a couple more witnesses, and update it. Oh, by the way, when you do the advance directives, look at the signature lines and see who has to witness it, because unless things have changed, you have to have, one family member can sign off on it, but you have to have a disinterested party. It can't be a hospital employee who works for the hospital, but a lot of hospitals have volunteers who can witness them. You have to comply with the requirements, and wills are no different. You have to have them witnessed generally by 2 people. Generally speaking, it's better if they're not recipients or beneficiaries under the will, because otherwise there can be some questions about whether there was undue influence or something like that. Get a couple of your neighbors to come over.
Do you have to know them then?
No,
Okay.
they have to be alive, and they have to be able to put their signature down. There are There's something called a holographic will that no courts like, but it's still part of the traditional common law practice where if you write in your own hand exactly what you want done with your stuff and sign it yourself and put it in a book and they're able to verify your signature and your handwriting, that counts. It's a really, really bad way to plan your estate. Yes?
Do wills and trusts need to be recorded or registered at a state level or anything like that?
The question is, do wills or trusts need to be registered at the state level and recorded? And the answer is no. I don't think there's even a mechanism for it.
No, they don't take them.
Yeah.
Okay,
They,
So-
so keep them in a safe place.
Yeah, I mean,
and your attorney should have them, if you use an attorney.
yeah, it's good to have, you want somebody to be able to find your will. Back to my family member's situation whose parent or whose mother was killed. She had written a will when my family member was a toddler. And it was made out to, she had her sister as the executor of the estate and then left everything to her child or children. Fast forward almost 30 years, she is killed suddenly, has not updated the will since. We didn't even think there was a will. And this sister, excuse me, rummaged through some boxes and came up with this old will and said, ha, I am the estate, I'm the executor. She actually wanted to be the administrator of the estate. Turns out she wanted to do it because she embezzled a bunch of money from it. This was not a good family situation. But the children in the meantime had, because generally speaking, if you haven't otherwise specified, your children will administer the estate, the closest relative. So my family member and siblings were administering the estate. The aunt comes in, takes control, and all of a sudden the money's disappeared, and that's still shaking out. It's a messy situation. So yes, keep your will current, know where it is, make sure other people know where it is, and so that you don't have the Hollywood trope of somebody walking in and, aha, was this the codicil to the will that was entered into last night in the den before he was hit in the head with a pipe by Mrs. Scarlett, Miss Scarlett. Yes, Miss Scarlett, no.
So, do you have to be specific of everything or?
No. The question is, do you have to be specific as to everything that is to be distributed? Your will can be, I hereby leave everything to my spouse. Period. Done.
Or children.
Or children, or you can just say everything I've got, and that's what somebody they call it a pour-over will. That's kind of what your will say if you've got trusts set up. It'll say, and if there's anything that isn't in the trust, then to my wife, and if my wife is not then, for me, if my wife is not then living, then to my children on a per capita basis. Yes?
If you will things, like your estate to a family member, and I only have one. So if you will that and everything, does the state get involved and say, I want, so much of this as, a death tax or whatever?
Okay.
Or could, trusting this one family member put their name on your assets?
It's a two-part question, I think, and they're both good questions. And the questions are, number one is, if you leave things in your will, does the state get to come in and say, I want a piece of that? And the second is, can you achieve the same thing by putting the person's name on the asset? And I'll address that in a couple of steps. On the first one, does the state get a piece? Oregon is a bad state in which to die. That said, until you're at, I think it's still $2 million your estate is $2 million, an estate tax does not apply. Check first, check with somebody, it may be $1 million, but I think it's 2.
But with property values, that's all changing.
With property values, you can find yourself, you're going along in life thinking, I'm somewhere between poor and doing okay. And then you look at Zillow and you say, I'm rich. And it's that I'm rich part that's going to determine whether the state's going to get a piece of your stuff. And it'll be valued at the time of death. And there are a whole bunch of tax complications that this is where I'm not giving legal advice, but you'll want to talk with an estate planning lawyer, accountant, and work through that. There are ways you can minimize that. That's one reason to put stuff in a trust. You can actually protect each. I think it is $1 million actually instead of 2 for the estate tax trigger in Oregon. But if it's a married couple and you have the marital assets in a trust, you can preserve the first to die's exemption so that it's a $2 million trigger instead of a $1 million trigger. But that's it. I mean, we're all Oregonians, right? But if you wanted to do some planning, move to Washington, Idaho, or Wyoming to die, and your state tax worries will be much less intense. Washington, I think the trigger is 6 million, federal is 6 million.
I have a daughter that's in a nursing home. She's had a stroke and she's paralyzed on her right side. And I have total guardianship over her. And do I assign somebody else to do that if I die?
The question is, you have a family member who is incapacitated and you are assigned as guardian. Do you need to have a backup guardian? The answer is yes, unless you want a judge to appoint a guardian.
But does she appoint it, or does the younger, her daughter?
If the incapacitated person is in fact incapacitated, they can't designate a guardian, an alternative. So if that hasn't been set up, you'll want to talk with somebody who does these kinds of estate planning questions. If you want to build a windmill, I'm your guy, because when you drive out the gorge, those windmills have my signatures all over them. Wills and trusts, not so much. The only ones that have my signatures on them are the ones that I've done for myself. So, question back here.
Not a question, but on the garden, I worked in the courts.
I'm sorry.
I know, for 25 years. So, on the guardianship, just because we went through this, we had an incapacitated person. The mother was appointed through the court to be that person's guardian. The mother reached an age where she felt like she could no longer be the guardian. It wasn't simple because she could not find a relative that was willing to be that guardian. The judge would not release her as the guardian until there was a guardian in place. The court, there are some areas where they have professional guardians, if you want to call them professional guardians. So eventually in that case, they were able to find a guardian to take over for the mother. But it took a couple of years to get through that.
So the
In
short
other
answer is
words,
you may want
you
to.
can't just designate somebody. They
If
have
they're
to.
willing to do it, if
Yeah.
they're willing to
That's
do
what I
it,
meant.
they have to be willing to do it. And then the judge will then appoint.
Yeah, we're getting into the constitutional class now because there are these things called the 14th through the 16th Amendments to the Constitution that prohibit slavery. And so I'm amazed that judge didn't let the guardian step down, because that's involuntary servitude in my book.
It is, but it left that incapacitated person with nobody to watch out for
Sure.
their interests.
Sure, and that's, I would argue that's why we have the court system, so they can make that hard decision to find somebody who has to do it in But if you start the process now, the short answer is it'll be much better, because that way you're not in that situation.
Yeah.
So if you can find another family member who'd be willing to do it, then you could probably get something done. Thanks for the insights, and because the practical stuff is important. You know, I went to law school, so I have a lot of theories, and I know almost nothing about how it works.
And I'll make one other comment about wills and probate. If you owe the state money, such as through a fine, the state is looking for people who owe the state money, and if they're going to inherit money, if there's a will, and they're named in that will to inherit money, the state's gonna step in and take theirs first.
So pay your dang speeding tickets before you die. That's the takeaway from that.
I would like a definition of, we know kind of what a will is,
Uh-huh.
but what's a trust?
Okay,
What's the difference between a will and a trust?
but let's hold that for just a minute, because I think I have to go back and answer your second question.
Yes,
And your second question was,
if I put my,
if you put the person's name on your stuff,
yeah,
Like a house.
like a house.
uh-huh,
Real estate is a special category unto itself. I don't know if you know this, but most contracts, if you sign a contract to buy a car or something, and the guy refuses to sell you the car, you can't force him to sell you the car. You can just get the money that you otherwise would have, the deal. Real estate, for reasons of common law history, is different. Real estate, they can force a seller to deliver the property to you. So real estate is a different thing. That was not directly pertaining to your question, but real estate is a different thing. And one of the things that you may want to do is to transfer title or part of the title in your real property to a family member. Before you do it, talk with
an attorney.
lawyers and with an accountant, because it may trigger tax consequences. Okay. But if you're, for spouses, unless you are really thinking you're gonna start hating on your spouse or something, it's a really good idea to have property held in common. That's certainly your home, real estate. Usually with cars too, you often will want it to be in both people's names, because otherwise you gotta go through a whole rigmarole to get it transferred after that.
I can't,
And or
I don't want your truck.
And or,
like, so Patty and Steve, or Patty or Steve? Does that-
usually it's
Is that
and.
worded?
Usually it's held in common. There are different kinds of ownership interests that we won't get into in real estate. There's a whole bunch of historical stuff you can do. But generally speaking, it would be Patty and Jim as either as tenants in common or as tenants in the entirety. It does limit your ability to, if you're going to sell, then you have to get the other person's signature as well. But
Unless they're dead.
unless they're dead, in which case it's really hard to get that signature. And you would have to get the signature of the beneficiary of that person's estate. So, like I said, get your documents in place, and that'll take care of that. So can you put somebody else's name on property? Yes, but there are also consequences to doing that sometimes. And if you're doing it, there's some planning you can do if you think that you may be, you may have to go into a long-term care facility or something, and if it's going to be funded by one of the federal programs, that transfer needs to be made quite a while before you go into the facility. Otherwise, the Social Security Administration will come back in and say, nice try, but we're going to take that and apply it against the money that we otherwise are going to pay for your care. So there's some planning you can do there. Again, talk with the people who do this for a living, and they can give you some good advice on it. I'll just let you know that it is an option out there. Okay? Answer that question, kind of, sort of?
Sort of, kind of, sort of.
Kind of, sort of?
Oh, you're gonna tell
Oh,
Julia the difference.
okay, you're next. Trusts. Yes, a will is just this document that tells people what you want to do with your stuff. When you set up a trust, you are effectively creating another person in the eyes of the law. So you are transferring assets in trust to be used for specified purposes. And so, for example, our homes are held in a marital trust in my wife's and my names. So when I bought my place in Wallowa, I had the title filled out to be the Dale Rasmussen and Carrie Rasmussen Marital Trust is the owner of that property. We also took out a mortgage on our other property that was held in trust, and that mortgage had to be entered into by the trust, and we signed as trustees. So each trust is this theoretical person. It's like a corporation. You know, it's a separate legal entity that you set it up, and the trust has to have a trustee, and that trustee is a person who has been delegated the authority to act on behalf of the trust. The kind of trust that you're probably going to look at for estate planning purposes is called a living trust. And so you are wearing your hat as, I'm wearing my hat as Dale, and I set up this trust, and I put my stuff into it, and I take off my hat as Dale, and I step into the trust, and I put on my hat as trustee of the Dale Rasmussen Trust. And so when I sign stuff on behalf of the trust, I sign it as Dale Rasmussen, trustee of the Dale Rasmussen Trust. So I get to be two people without being locked up in a mental institution for schizophrenia, because you get to be two people. You get to be Dale Rasmussen, and you get to be the Dale Rasmussen Trust. And generally speaking, it's a good idea to have stuff in a trust, because that's how you avoid probate. Because it's not your stuff anymore, it's the trust's stuff, and the trust doesn't die. So the probate court, as much as it might want to look at it, doesn't get to look at it, because that trust is not before the court. Just all the little stuff, hopefully little stuff, that you haven't put into the trust is before the court.
So
Yes.
you put big things in there then, like your house, property, your yacht, but like you wouldn't put like your vehicle or like what, I guess.
Yeah, the question is.
What else would you put in a trust?
Yeah, the
Like
question
big
is,
stuff.
you know, kind of what's the threshold of what you're gonna put into the trust? And, you know, do you, big stuff, yes, little stuff, do you do that or not? And the answer is whatever you're comfortable with. Generally speaking, having it in a trust is going to be better than not having it in a trust. Cars, I don't see them in trusts much, because cars have titles, and so in the title you put who owns the car, and it can have both of you on it. And otherwise, if it goes through probate, it's not going to affect people's lives one way or the other. If your car has to sit in a probate court for three months or 6 months or a year. However, if your investment accounts, we'll talk about IRAs and stuff a little bit too, but if your investment accounts aren't in a trust, those could be locked down until the court gets around to saying, sure, take some money out of it. And your spouse, your kids might need that money to live on because they say the wheels of justice grind slow but fine. And sometimes slow goes a really long time. I assume that Wallowa County's courts are not so bad. Get in the Portland area.
We're great here.
You can be locked, your stuff can be locked up for a year and a half till they get around to it.
So if you have a safe and you've got stuff in there, you know, like valuable metals or jewelry or anything like that, does the government get into the middle of that, or?
Well, the question is, if you have your stuff in a safe and your piles of gold bullion and precious metals and apparently catalytic converters, given the theft rates, does the state get into that? The short answer is the state is probably not going to come to your house and crack your safe and go look at what's going on there, unless you have some outstanding fines, in which they may. Technically, everything that you own when you die has to be dealt with in a trust, through a will, or through the intestate system. So all that stuff in your safe, by law, has to be identified. If it's in a trust, then again, you don't have to worry about it. If it is in your house and it has to be dealt with through the probate system, the probate system has to know what the assets are. So somebody has to do an accounting of your
So you
assets.
can't just give your kid the combination to the box and say,
Let's just say that there's a way that it's supposed to work, and then there's a way that it often does work. And we like to, honor and obey and sustain the law. We don't know what your kid's gonna do, but technically speaking.
Get rid of it before you die.
Yes, the suggestion was get rid of it before you die, and that is another estate planning tool. You can tell people exactly what you want to do right now by just saying, Josh, my son, I have my dad's gun, and I'd really like you to have that. So here, it's yours.
That's what I'm doing.
It's not your estate when you die at that point.
Yeah.
Again, before you do big transfers to your kids, again, talk with the accountants and the lawyers, because there's a thing called the gift tax, and it's triggered at $15,000 per recipient per year. And if you go past that, then you pay the tax on it, not the recipient. So gotta be a little bit careful there.
If you have a living trust, don't you have to have a third trustee?
Do you have to have a third trustee for a living trust? No. A good practice is you have a primary trustee and a secondary trustee in case the first trustee is unable or unwilling to serve. So you always want to fall back. Generally speaking, with a trust, you'll have a tertiary trustee that is a bank or something like that. They'll charge you for it, but that covers the ground you can put 15 levels of trustees in if you want. Yeah, they just kick them down the box until they run out of trustees. It's generally, historically, been a good idea to have something that's going to be around roughly forever to be the fallback, so that you're not in that situation where your daughter, is where nobody's going to be willing to be the trustee anymore. You've taken care of that by designating a corporate trustee.
Well, we had a living trust, but they told us we had to have a third trustee, and he died. And so what do you do in that case?
Well, you dig him up and you make him do it. I mean, the courts in Wallowa will make you do that. They won't let him. They're not gonna let a thing like death, let him out of that. If he died, then you would want to designate a replacement, and that kind of thing you can do since you are the living trustees. You can designate. You can cancel Fred and put in George anytime you want.
Can you just cancel the trust?
Well, yeah, you can always break the trust. You have to, go through the process of deeding everything back to you individually, but you can break the trust, but it's generally not a good idea because it's there for a reason. So, but if you want to pay the money to form it again, yeah, go for it. Makes lawyers good money.
it's probably, you have a third one in case you're traveling and you get in an accident, then you have a third, or somebody besides you two.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. The question is, this is one of those, the president and his entire cabinet can't be on the same plane at one time.
Yeah.
It's that concept. You want to have somebody who's not likely to be in the car with you when you get hit.
I'm just gonna say we got about 10 minutes left. So.
Okay.
Just letting you.
Yes, but we have a question that we already said we were going to answer.
What happens when someone contests the will, like children, and they fight over?
What happens when someone contests the will? That's a great question.
It's a mischief, and how can we avoid?
It's a great question. In my experience, the very worst thing that can happen to a family is have an inheritance. It's great if your parents die and they don't have a penny, because then you're still siblings and you're still talking with each other. Another family member story, my brother-in-law, his grandparents died. They had something like 6 kids, fairly close-knit family. The second of the grandparents died. they drew out the knives and started stabbing, including, it got to the point where, well, Grandpa told me that, or Dad told me that I could have that table. Well, no, he said I could have it. They cut the table in half.
Oh, my.
This is how stupid people get. And they don't talk to each other anymore. It just blew the family apart. This is why you need to do the planning. Specify who's getting what. And one thing you can do, you asked about putting your name on property. If there are sentimental kind of things, like you've got a picture that your niece always loved, put her name on a piece of tape and says, when I go, this goes to Martha. And I mean, yeah, it could be contested, but generally speaking, let people know that you did and say, oh, by the way, if you look on the back, when I go, your name's on that, that's yours.
I've actually done that.
It's a great thing to
And
do.
give it to them now.
Because otherwise it's a, well, Dad told me I could have the table, and that's not great.
I have a friend whose sister just died a week ago, and a niece called him and said, I get her house.
Get
She
what?
told me, this is real, he just told me, he goes, she told me I get a house, and he had the trust and the will, and said, that's very interesting, because right here, it says you get half.
Yeah.
And it done, it was over.
And it avoids that. And when you do get, here's where I hired an estate planning lawyer to put our estate together. In part because, again, we have property, so we're rich. But also he knows he knew what he was doing. And we went through it, and there is a will, and in the will and in the trust, there's a line that says, if any beneficiary of this trust or this will contests the distribution, they get 0. So it's
That's my next
Follow-up question.
Yes.
Does that stick?
Generally speaking, yes. I mean, people can sue anybody for anything at any time, so you're always going to get some wacky family member who's going to sue to contest the will. You can't stop them from doing that. I don't think very many of them are probably successful, unless it is, where it comes down to is if you cut out like one of your children or something that would normally be a natural successor, that's where you're probably going to get most of it. But if you document it right, it should stand up. But again, that's where you get people, well, that's not the right will. He did a subsequent one. That's where you have all your paperwork.
You may not be able to answer this. My parents died and left a pretty valuable piece of property.
I wouldn't have known that, so I couldn't have answered.
Yeah,
So,
no, but, so we maintained the property for a number of years, and then one sibling fought to get it sold.
Yeah.
So they could get their share. And I pushed back for years and finally said,
So
okay,
did his sister.
yeah, we'll just sell it. I don't want to tear the family apart. It killed me. It was been in our family for my whole life.
Yeah.
Can you, what you just said, now that's not contesting the will, right? Can you put, and I joked about this earlier, can you put in there if any of the siblings fight over the property, the assets, they're out and they get $1? Is that a legal thing?
The question is, can you build in something that is a broader challenge bar? I don't know the absolute answer to that question, but generally speaking, yes, you could. People can generally contract around whatever part of their life they want and of their stuff that they want. There are a few prohibitions, contracting to, do illegal things or something, but
That helps not split up a family. Because
Yeah.
You're going to get in a big family, somebody
Yeah.
wants their.
yeah, the downside of having, a traditional LDS family with, 6+ kids, increased likelihood of disputes. Yes?
Medical care is expensive. We can talk about the distribution of assets. Is there any distribution of liabilities?
Almost never is there. The question is there a distribution of liabilities on death? In some cultures, yes. In the US legal system, generally, no. However, if there are liabilities for medical care, et cetera, the creditors do get a say in what is distributed from an estate. They get to come in and say, well, you only get to distribute the net proceeds of the estate. So if you have an estate of $100,000 and you've got $80,000 of medical bills, the hospital gets the $80,000 and your heirs will receive the $20,000 because they were never entitled to it anyway. It was the estate has to pay its bills first, and then the residue is distributed. The trust sometimes can protect some of that, but again, it has to be set up well in advance. Yeah.
What happens if you don't want to get what's willed to you?
You don't have to take, the question is, what happens if you don't want what is willed to you? You don't have to take it. Is there a particularly ugly statue or something you're thinking about? So what do you need to think about right now? I mean, first of all, think about talking with an estate planning professional. I highly recommend that. It's going to be money well spent. Paying professionals to do what they do is always painful, but it's going to save a lot of heartbreak.
I just did that and got mine all set.
Yeah. And setting up an estate is likely to cost a few $1,000s. It's not going to be $15,000 unless your name rhymes with Tusk. That was going to be an expensive estate. Maybe not by the time he gets done spending it, but when you do that, the first question they're going to say is, okay, you need to bring in a listing of all of your assets. Well, crap, I've got all this. You need to make the list now and say, I've got this 40 acres out here. I've got my house. I've got these 2 cars. I've got a couple of really nice paintings. I've got my yacht, and I've got my guns. And so make that list, because you're going to have to know the lawyer has to know what is there, so that you can see what has to go into the trust, what can be put into joint ownership, things like that. So make a list of all your stuff and assemble this other information too. You're going to need this. You're going to need information about your home, including mortgages if applicable, with all the contact numbers and passwords and things like that. A list of your bank accounts. I don't know how many of you talked with your family members about where your investment accounts are. They need to know. That includes 401ks, IRAs, things like that.
Speaking of homes and mortgages and that type of thing, so we paid cash for our property, we paid cash for our house to be built, and so we own it, but I asked Bob the other day, I said, so where's our receipt for, owning that? Where's our deed of trust? They used to have a legal deed that you would have when you own something, like property or a house.
You have a deed.
Yeah.
I went.
Yeah.
They have it in the county, it's recorded.
Yeah, the county has it recorded.
Physically?
I don't have, no, they've got it.
They got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you should also have a physical copy of it somewhere. You signed it once.
Yeah,
So-
we need it to be in our
Yeah,
Yeah.
we should print it.
But yeah.
So you need
they
to-
will get a copy of it. When you do the trust, they will get that from the county.
Yeah.
You don't have to
Crazy.
give it to.
You need to have a list of your insurance policies. When my father-in-law died, I went down into his he hadn't done any of this, so I went down into his office and I dug through and I found a couple of life insurance policies that my mother-in-law didn't even know existed. They weren't huge, but they paid for the funeral and did some other stuff. But it took a couple of days to dig through the stuff. If you got employer-related benefits, you need to get those out. Again, personal story, one of my best friends a month ago was driving out to say goodbye to his mother who was dying of Alzheimer's in Utah. He got just west of La Grande, and there was a truck jackknifed in the road. He stopped, and a truck came around the corner and plowed into his car and killed him instantly. He was 2 years younger than I am. He was an executive at a major corporation. And so some other good friends, and his wife was in the car and she escaped without a scratch. It was truly miraculous. But Brian was pretty well organized, but still, we just had to go through and we had to talk with his employer, find out what death benefits were available, get his last paycheck lined up, get his, the COBRA coverage for medical for his wife, find where the insurance policies were. we spent a lot of hours helping her get that stuff lined up, and he was pretty well organized, as I say. You don't want, if you're hit riding your motorcycle home from work, and unlike me, you're apparently not indestructible.
Your mission's not over.
You don't want your wife, your kids, who are dealing with their husband's and father's death, to, in addition to having to figure out the funeral and spend some time crying, hopefully, and to deal with all this other stuff. Not all of it has to be done, the first week, but if income is an important thing. So, if your spouse still needs to, is counting on that paycheck, you got to make sure it gets there. Make sure that all that stuff is written down and made available to your survivors, your successors. Confirm that your IRA accounts and things like that have the right beneficiaries on them. You don't want your ex-wife who died to be on your 401k. You want your current spouse to be as the beneficiary on your 401k. Okay. We've talked about giving things away earlier rather than later, and designating on small stuff who should get it. If you have heirs who have special needs, you might want to set up a special trust for them. Some people really shouldn't be handling their own money until they're about 74. But it's not generally going to last that long. But you might have somebody who has had a substance abuse problem or something like that, and you might want to set up a trust. Sometimes they're called spendthrift trusts, where somebody else has to sign off before a distribution gets made. Yes, your rent's coming due, I'll sign off on the red check, but you're not going to get $5,000 to buy a motorcycle and something to smoke. So, things you'll need to talk about with your estate planning professionals. That's what I've got.
I was just gonna add one dimension. If an elderly parent will let you, my dad did.
Mm-hmm.
He lived with us. We went through all those things with him, an attorney. We found one of the life insurance policies that didn't have the kids on it as a beneficiary. We got his medical records, his military records, and an attorney helped us do it. But when he did die, it was so smooth. Yes, there was probate, but it went like that. But it was still probably $3,000 in legal fees to settle everything.
Yeah.
But there was money there, right?
And if you've got a $100,000 life insurance policy, believe me, it's much better to have it paid directly to the beneficiary than to have to go through probate, where it may trigger the estate tax.
Yes.
Because life insurance policies don't. They're not taxed. They're just money that comes right in. But you've got to have the designees right.
Now, what we want to do with our 6 kids is just have them sell everything and divide the money. But then with this one that's in the nursing home, that would not be prudent to do, because the state would, if she's a ward of the state, really.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, with a special needs thing like that,
because
and that's where you would want to, in your will, it's not being cruel, you're just saying that doesn't make any sense, so the distribution is going to go among your 5 children, and your daughter who is incapacitated, give her something, but it doesn't have to be an equal share. And so it's not cruel, it's just realizing what is there and saying, I'd rather have my money go to somebody other than Salem.
Yeah, because we couldn't afford the 4,000 a month.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think that Luke is saying that we're done.
Unless you have one thing, a couple of things you want to get through. What I don't want to do is have you here until 9:30 at night answering very specific, detailed things that are outside of your scope or comfort.
Well, and as you've noticed, I can chuck and dodge with the best of them when it comes to this stuff. Like I said, if you need a windmill built, solar facility built, yeah, I'm your guy. But otherwise, and some of the investment houses, like we manage our investments with Charles Schwab. They actually have estate planning people who can help you out on some of this stuff as well. So,
This was great. Thank you both.
all right.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
Very
That was awesome. It was really good.
Yeah, we really did put Brother Rasmussen on the spot there, because like you said,
Thank
it's
you
not.
very much, sir.
Yeah, because that's not really his specialty, so, but we very much appreciate you. Thank you, Deb. You know, like they've said, I'm just gonna reiterate, my family took care of both sets of my grandparents. One lived next door, and he was bedridden for 8 years. And so all day, every day, somebody was over there taking care of him. And that's how he grew up. He had Parkinson's disease, and so it took his legs, so he couldn't walk anymore, but it was gradual, right? And my dad's father, he got Parkinson's as well, and 9 months after he was diagnosed, he died. So things happen unexpectedly all the time, right? So anyway, with that experience in my life, and then having Kelsey come home and talk to me about different things, and helping some people in the ward and in previous wards as well, I feel like it was a good opportunity that we had two professionals here that we could rely on. So anyway, thank you again, and I'll go ahead and say a closing prayer. Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this time that we're able to come and plan and prepare to be able to take care of our affairs. And we thank thee, Heavenly Father, for the people who are here to present. We thank thee for their time. And we ask thee, Heavenly Father, to bless us, that we'll be able to follow the promptings of the Holy Ghost, and be able to plan our life and be able to enjoy the things that we have here. We say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
You got some more.
Gary, who gets the goat?
Pardon me?
Who gets the goat?
Who gets the goat? I don't know if there's anybody here who can handle that goat. I got bruises all over my belly. That thing hit me.
Well, today it was Mary.
My dog's gonna shoot it.